Yes. Okay. So, as you can see, today we're going to do some parasitology. It's going to be itchy and it's going to be gross. And it's long as well. So
there's no botflies in there.
No, I haven't got botflies.
We got flies?
No, but there's a lot of worms and like very in-depth pictures of different parasites.
Who used to like she used to be a vet nurse.
Yeah.
And it's within the vet industry, it's like people seem to either be able to deal with either vomit or worms.
Yeah, parasites are my thing. Like I can quite happily eat my lunch after like hemorrhagic diarrhea.
Yeah.
But if I've seen worms crawling out of a bum hole,
Yeah.
Anyway, so we're going to do that today. Like I said, it's quite a long lecture, so I've tried to put in videos for you guys to just not hear the sound of my voice every so often. So we'll see how far we get through. If not, we can pop up some leftover slides later down the line, so don't worry. Well, brace yourself. So in this lesson, guys, listen. We're going to have a look at common parasites of common companion animals and livestock. We'll have a look at the life cycles of these common parasites and the use of terminology, things that we're going to be using quite often in parasitology. So take 2 minutes now just to kind of write down what your definition of a parasite is.
Is your mum the host organism, is she?
My sister would say her unborn child. Nice. She's like, it's slipping off me and making me feel gross. So everyone got an idea of what we're thinking about?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything that lives off animals' blood or gut.
Host organism.
Yeah, so we've got an organism which feeds or lives off another, so the host, to the advantage of the parasite and to the detriment of the host in most cases. So generally it's going to have a negative effect on the host. So parasitology is going to be the study of parasites, their host and the relationship between them. And then we've got a subsection of that which is going to be veterinary parasitology, which is the study of relationships between parasites and animal hosts. So just kind of narrowing it down a little bit more, thinking more about the animal-based hosts that we might see. So we try and categorise them a little bit. So if we're going to look at the broad kind of category of veterinary parasitology, they're normally divided into endoparasites and ectoparasites. So does anyone know what the difference is? Yeah. Oh, sorry, sorry, am I not looking?
Basically, we're just both blind.
An endoparasite is on the inside.
Yeah.
Ecto is on the outside. So
Yeah.
a tick is an ecto and a tapeworm is an ecto.
Yeah, perfect. Sometimes they're characterised a bit more, even more so. So you'll look at morphology, their different lifestyle styles. I keep saying that. Life cycles.
Imagine that a little
Yeah.
tour around the house.
Exactly. The life cycles, or sometimes we'll have a look at the environmental requirements that they have, so what they need to survive within the host, or sort of their survival rates outside of that host, how their cycle varies depending on the environment. So this can be particularly important in cases that are going to be transmitted to humans. So zoonotic parasites that are sort of do have the ability to be passed over to us as well. So there's a number of ways that we will diagnose parasites or parasite infestation. So there's coprological, so with fecal analysis. We'll go a bit further into detail of all of these a little bit further down the line. Hematological, so having a look at the blood. Histopathological, so having a look at your skin scrapes or tissues within the body. Immunological, so that basically looks at antigens, detecting antigens that might be released as a reaction to pathogens. And then molecular biology, so that tends to focus a bit more on DNA that can be detected from the parasite. So if we have a look at coprological, so basically this is normally used in identification and counting of like eggs that the parasites are shedding. So has anyone ever seen any sort of fecal flotation test being done? It'll basically try and separate out like eggs and fecal matter. So yeah, it's more commonly used in like horses and livestock, larger animals. Yeah.
I know they do it with birds as well, like a worm count
Yeah.
for them.
Yeah, so this is something that will be commonly used. We can then move on to hematological, which basically looks at the presence of parasites in blood cells. So again, it's just kind of taking a blood sample, and then you'll have sampling, have a look at the blood sample under the microscope to see the presence of these parasites within your blood cells. So it's normally done with like a blood smear. Has anyone seen blood smears being made? So then they can have a proper look at each individual cell and see what's lurking within them where it shouldn't be. Histopathological, so again, it involves looking at tissue samples from animals and having a look at them under the microscope. A lot of the time, especially with parasites, that will be looking at skin scrapes or hair plucks, like we said with scabies and demodex, things like that. You'll have to take a sample of the hair follicles to see what's lurking within. Immunological, like I said before, kind of detects the presence of antigens on or in the parasite. So this will be an immunofluorescence. Does anyone know what that is? Basically using fluorescent dye to put like markers on antigens from parasites, and then they can be more visible under a microscope. Anyone know about ELISA testing? Yeah.
God, I've done this all. I was in the lab for like 3 weeks when the vet nurses were doing some things. It's essentially like you sort of you kind of got. It's quite similar to like almost similar to like the COVID testing, that
Yeah.
isn't it? You kind of put the drops into the different.
Yeah. So it's an enzyme linked immunoassay is what it kind of stands for, but they're basically looking at the detection of antigens where they will have different buffers and separate it all out, and then it will flag up, basically like a COVID test or a pregnancy test. It will give you lines to say whether they're positive or negative for these things. How about Western blot? Does anyone know anything about Western blot? So that's a test that will look for amino acids that might be released by will be within the antigen that's been released. So it kind of focuses a bit more on the amino acids involved. So again, that's just another way that they'll flag up that there's parasites present. So a lot of the time this will be used with the coprological exams for specific identification of parasite species. So there's an ELISA test for parvovirus. Obviously it's not a parasite, but you will actually mix fecal matter with all of the different buffers and then put it on the ELISA. So normally it will involve feces a lot of times. Joys. And then molecular biology, involves the studying of the parasite's DNA to kind of aid their detection. So that's it's effectively like your COVID PCR test that you do. So they'll go off to the lab and then they'll use the polymerase chain reaction, what the PCR is, to try and see what DNA is present. So that's how those work. Any questions? No? So, your PCR stuff will allow detection in smaller insect vectors, not just sort of large animal hosts. So it doesn't really need a large sample to be able to be sent away for that. So we'll have a reminder of some of the terminology that we're going to use. So does anyone remember what a primary host is?
Isn't that just what's kind of presenting with the potential infection? Like the thing that it's kind of living on?
Yeah, so it'll be a host that the parasite reaches its adult stage in. So that's going to be sort of like its primary host. It's what it's going to focus on the most. That's where it will reach its adult stage within its life cycle. Then got a secondary host. So can anyone work out what that might be based on what a primary host is?
They're not there for, they're there for a short period of time and they don't reach the adult stage?
Yeah.
Areas where they perhaps they try to have the animal consumed or something. That's where the larvae.
Yeah. Yeah, so kind of a mixture of both. It'll harbour the parasite for a short time only, and like some amount of development will occur, but not necessarily right the way through to adult stage like it would in a primary host. How about an incidental host?
The original host is eaten by something else, perhaps.
Yeah. So that would be an example of an incidental host. So the host becomes a host that becomes infected, but it's not required for the maintenance of the parasite within that population. So it's not normally within the normal life cycle. So if something randomly ate something that was already infected and got infected itself, kind of as a segue out of the cycle, that would be an incidental host. Does anyone know what a dead end host is? Yeah.
Something it can't survive in.
Yeah, effectively. So yeah, you're looking at a host in which the infectious agents are not transmitted to other susceptible hosts, and it prevents the parasite completing its life cycle effectively. So it'll stop development, and the parasite will basically die within the host or with the dead end host. So it kind of stops that cycle in its tracks to some extent. And then a vector.
Yeah, that's something that just sort of will maybe sort of transmit the parasite. So, for example, like through mosquitoes and things like that.
Yeah. So an agent that transmits an infectious pathogen into another living organism. So yeah, the kind of way that it's transmitted around by another organism before it gets to its primary host. And then zoonosis.
Disease that could be transferred between animals and humans.
Yeah. So infection transmitted between species, humans to animals, and vice versa.
Just a quick question, can zoonosis not also apply if it's between different animal species as well, like your cows and your badgers, for example?
Ooh. I thought that it was purely including humans.
Yeah, there's a different word.
Yeah.
It's called something completely different. It's where it can travel from different species. Isn't called zoonosis. It's called
I'll have a look at what it is and then I'll let you know in the break. Let me write it down. Just so we've got all our lingo down. Lovely. So, moving on to ectoparasites. So, quite rightly, as we said, they're parasites that live on the outside of the host. So they can be found on the skin as well as on the outgrowths of the skin. So, you know, hair, fur, nails, claws, anything like that. That's all kind of classed as an ectoparasite. So this will include your lice, fleas, and mites. Everyone get ready to start getting itchy. So number one culprit, fleas, we'll see them first. So these are wingless insects that have adapted to live off the blood of animals. They'll normally feed on warm-blooded vertebrates, so dogs, cats, humans, and a number of others, ferrets, mice, pretty much any of the traditional companion species that we see, they'll live off of. So they're the ctenocephalides species, but then you have different species for cats and dogs. So you have ctenocephalide canis and ctenocephalide bellis. They can live for a year and a half under the right conditions, so if their cycle is right and their environment is correct, but they can also remain dormant within an environment in the right conditions as well. So I'm sure you've all heard horror stories of owners thinking that they're over a flea infestation, and then they turn on their heating come autumn, and all of a sudden they're all awake again within their house. So if it's not sort of treated in the environment as well, they can sort of lie dormant whilst it's a bit colder in the house, and then as soon as you put your radiators on, out they come. And quite crucial with these guys is the females will need to have a blood meal before they can produce any eggs. So this is just a brief overview of the lifestyle or life cycle of a flea. So an adult flea will be living on the animal. The egg will be laid by the female after 2 days after her sort of first feed on that animal. The eggs will drop off into the environment and then hatch sort of 2 to 14 days afterwards to form larvae. They will then form pupae within the environment after seven days and form these cocoons from debris. So that might be dust and things that's in the environment, or skin cells that are being shed. They'll form these little cocoons. And then the adult flea emerges after 10 days, well, it can be up to a month afterwards, and then you're sort of starting the cycle all over again. So it is a little bit variable. So if you have a look at sort of, 2 days here, 2 to 14 days, 7 days, 10 days to a month, it can the whole cycle can take anywhere from 19 days to sort of 53. So I think that's sometimes why it's quite difficult to get a handle on infestations, because it can be going on a lot longer than people think. So sort of constant treatment is needed. So we'll have a little look at a video. Oh no. Why can't we hear her? Does this work? Maybe. Let's try again. Oh yeah, there we go. It's working.
Max loves to play outside.
Sorry, some of them are very We don't care about your treatment.
I saw the Bayer at the top.
Yeah,
of the
here she
van.
comes. She's going to sell you something. No, shush now. So we'll have a look at some of the symptoms. As I said, I'm really sorry. Some of the videos are very like twee and very commercial. I'll try and say things. So you can have mild to severe itching. So this will be a lot of the things that owners will pick up on. They'll see the itching and scratching that's going on. It can cause anemia in sort of extreme and really high flea burdens, high infestation, because obviously they're having blood meals continuously, and it can cause anemia that way. You can also have flea allergic dermatitis. So if the pet is unfortunate enough to be allergic to flea saliva, obviously every time they're getting a bite, it can cause symptoms that are sort of more pronounced and worse than they would be normally. So, you know, abnormal amounts of itching and scratching, redness, like an allergy would. Bald patches and hot spots. So again, that will normally be a secondary symptom from sort of the itching and scratching that's gone on previously, and a certain amount of kind of self-trauma that's involved. So that's generally how those come about. This video kind of shows you what we mean when we say like a high flea burden.
I can see it
Oh my
already.
God.
Yeah.
So you can literally see, like, there's no question as to whether this dog has fleas or not. You can see them walking everywhere, and they're all at different stages. You've got, you can see that there's adults, and there's going to be eggs involved there as well. It's a real rife infestation. So that dog might well be a candidate for flea allergic dermatitis. So this is sort of some of the severe cases that you might see of this, because it is literally an allergy to the saliva. So every time they bite, it's causing that like inflammatory response, and in turn you're going to have much more self-trauma and scratching and biting and chewing at themselves than you would with just normal flea infestation. So then they'll end up bald and sore and red. So in that case, getting on top of the flea infestation is going to be pretty much the only way that you're going to cure that, because otherwise you're just sort of symptomatically dealing with the skin condition rather than the actual cause of it. So these are some microscope images of like the head of a flea at an adult stage, and then the larval. Like I said, you're going to be itchy. Are they?
Oh, wasn't right.
Okay, well, you guys are clearly on the right course. So, not only are they an issue in themselves, they can also be a vector for other diseases. So, they will transmit a range of viral, bacterial, protozoan, or helminthic diseases to humans and animals. So this helminthic is worms. I can see your face going wet. So they're known to be a vector for typhus, as well as myxomatosis and tapeworm. So we'll have a look at some of these in a little bit more detail in the following slides. So there is obviously treatment for it, as that lady was kind of going to tell us about before I cut her off. So a lot of this will involve sort of spot-ons. You can get the Seresto collars that are impregnated with the treatment, and also like oral. So Brevecto is like an oral tablet rather than a spot-on or a collar.
I've got a stronghold up. In one spot. And then there's
Not on this slide.
Oh, they don't even work.
Strongholds.
Those are like, well, I don't know about
Brevecto,
the Comfortis.
Comfortis.
The front line don't work. Advantage isn't great.
You'll have varying results with all of them.
Yeah,
So
I would have mine from
one of my dogs was
brand
tied on Frontline. The other one, it didn't work at all.
Yeah.
Collar on her.
sorry.
I don't know about fleas, but I was just thinking, you got like blue healers, they
Yeah.
don't get ticks,
Oh,
really, because ticks don't like their blood or something.
interesting.
It's an awesome breed.
Again, I did not know this.
Yeah, so it's an Aussie
Something else
sheepdog.
I'm going to be looking up in the break.
So a lot of people use them. buy them because you didn't
have to worry about parasite control in terms of fleas.
So I don't.
What was
Well, I
that?
don't know whether or not it extends onto fleas or not. So.
I'll have a look and see what I can find out about blue healers, because that's cool. Yeah, so there'll be varying different sort of results with all of these. Yeah.
The only other question we were going to ask you both actually know the answer.
Oh, go.
It's
Transmissible. Nice. Did we all hear that? Yeah. Cool. Thank you. So yeah, you're going to have varying results from these depending on the animal in question. Some of them will respond really well to treatment, and some of them might take a few different treatments before they actually find a result. The one thing that I would say about this is it's important, again, like I said previously, to make sure that you're treating the environment as well, because very often, even if you get the fleas that are on the animal under control, they'll just keep reinfesting themselves if they are still rife within the house. So particularly carpeted areas, curtains, all of that kind of stuff, but they can live on hard floors as well. So just bear that in mind when you're giving advice to people. Make sure anywhere that the pet's gone gets treated as well. So I think people sometimes forget their cars and things like that. So make sure that that's something that people have started scratching already. Something that is considered. So, hello. So we'll move on to ticks now. So these are small arachnids that are adapted again to live off the blood of animals. So they're obligate hematophages, so which basically means that they need blood to survive and develop through the life stages. I told you it'd be fun listening to me like trying to say words. They're widely distributed around the world, but tend to sort of flourish in warm, humid climates. So you'll probably have heard people discuss about when it's like tick season here. So it's normally like a summer event. So that's generally when they're found more. And they are the Ixodes species. So this is just a quick look at their life cycle. So an adult flea, an adult tick feeds on the blood of the host, and then the female tick will fall to the ground, and after about 10 days, when they become sort of fully engorged with blood, that's when you see them when they're like the massive, like black almost, because they're just completely filled with blood. That female will then lay several thousand eggs on the ground. The larval ticks will hatch, and then they'll be able to jump onto the host the following year normally and feed for about 6 days. The larval ticks then fall off of the host once they've been fully fed, and they go on to the nymphal stage. The nymphal ticks jump onto the second host the following year again, so it's quite a long, complicated life cycle. And then these nymphal ticks fall off when they're fully fed and develop into the adult form, and then jump onto the host again and start all over. Yeah. So, enjoy. We don't need to do this. That's why I was like, now, baby. You're saying the wrong thing. Yeah. So again, much like with fleas, there's going to be a number of sort of tick-borne diseases, diseases that are transmitted ticks. So they have they can transmit diseases from a range of different pathogens. So a lot of the time they'll harbour more than one disease-causing agent, which means that they can pass on a number to the host once they've actually latched on, which obviously kind of makes diagnosis quite difficult if you end up with multiple infections being passed on. So diagnosis and treatment will be quite difficult in that case. So we'll have a look at a few of the tick-borne diseases that are quite common. So Lyme disease, does anyone know anything about Lyme disease? Yeah?
It has a lot of different symptoms that kind of look like symptoms.
Yeah.
Either the key one though is like the little ring.
Yeah.
That can be caused.
Yeah. So I think a bit later on we'll go into Lyme disease in a little bit more detail, and I've got some nice pictures of like the bullseye type rash that it gives around the bite. But as you can imagine, it increases in prevalence during spring and summer, obviously when you've got an increased risk of being bitten by a tick because they're enjoying the summer weather. There is.
If you don't notice that you've had it as well, you've had it for like a long period of time, it can affect your memory as well.
Like chronic symptoms going on.
Lyme disease in my first year of college.
Really? Do you have the bullseye?
I didn't realise because it was like on like this, the inside of my leg.
Oh, so not as noticeable. Yeah. Really?
Yeah.
So then another one will be ehrlichia or ehrlichiosis. So that affects the white blood cells, so the parasite will move into the white blood cells. That, again, it's kind of one of those things, like you said, there's a lot of symptoms that will cross over in a lot of these sort of tick-borne diseases. So the acute phase straight off will be fever, lymphadenopathy, so swelling of the lymph nodes and glands, and then pancytopenia, so that's destruction of the blood cells. So, you know, they might have a bit of anemia, they'll have low white blood cells, low platelets, etc. And then it will move on to the chronic phase. So again, some variable signs, but you can get bone marrow damage, which in turn can cause bleeding disorders and affect the production of platelets, anemia, and then can sometimes include neurological signs as well. And then lastly, we've got babesia or babesiosis. So again, that's another parasite infecting the red blood cells this time. It's less common in the UK, but I think the increase in sort of imported pets recently has kind of increased how much it's being seen in this country, just because of, like, you know, not necessarily the best testing before they come over and things like that. So it is in the veterinary world, it's something that's often a differential diagnosis if you are dealing with an imported pet. So to have a little bit of a more in-depth look of Lyme disease. So it's caused by the Borrelia bacteria, and it can be transmitted to humans, so it's zoonotic. Like we've said, it's kind of commonly recognised by the expanding area of redness, which its proper name is Erythema migrans, which is the fancy name for the, let me try and get a picture of that, the bullseye rash that you get. So it will originate from where the tick actually bit, and then you kind of have the rings going outwards. Normally starts about a week after the initial tick bite. So again, as we said, the symptoms include sort of fever, headaches, tiredness, joint pain, can sort of move on to neck stiffness. I can't talk today at all. Neck stiffness and heart palpitations, and as you already said, it can affect memory in the long term as well. So yeah, like I said, normally it'll be that kind of bullseye rash that will be your indicator. Yeah.
Would the bullseye be, say, if like your pet had Lyme's disease?
Yeah.
Would you see it on them, or do
Yeah,
they have
you
different
can.
symptoms?
Yeah, but obviously it's a bit more difficult because they're covered in hair.
Yeah.
So I think that's why that's the indicator that we give to humans.
Yeah.
Because it's going to be easier to.
So what are like the main symptoms in animals?
It will be this kind of tiredness, lethargy,
Okay.
but obviously that's quite difficult to diagnose something from because again, a lot of the diseases that we look at
A
will
really good
cause.
indicator for it is it's not like a dog that wears a collar and it like has pain when you put its collar on and off. That's a really good one. Like
Oh, sort of like the neck stiffness.
So if you've got a dog that's like super tired, being really lazy and lethargic, and then you touch its ears or anything and it's upset by that, that's a really good symptom of it.
Yeah. So
I was thinking more for horses.
neck pain.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. I was like,
In horses, a really good symptom
There we
is
go.
they won't bend. So if they've been bitten on one side of the neck and they're like kind of bend
yeah.
and it goes really stiff like it would normally, that's a really good one. And then again, lazy, if they break their legs, that's a good one.
Good to know.
So we have a look at Babesia now. So this is malaria-like in a lot of its like symptoms. It's kind of the second most common blood parasite of mammals after Lyme disease. So it can be asymptomatic. However, generally the symptoms kind of show up 1 to 4 weeks after the tick bite has happened. But again, they've got this kind of generalized symptoms of fever, fatigue, general discomfort, muscle aches, anorexia and depression. And then later down the line, this can lead to organ failure. So you can understand how it's difficult to diagnose any of these, really. They all kind of fall under the same generalized symptoms.
Could you like find out which disease it would be if you took like a blood test?
Yeah, so this would be sending off for sort of PCR and things like that. You can have a look. And that would generally be the way that it goes. But obviously sometimes if you've got a patient that comes in with pain, like generalized pain, not necessarily your first thought is going to be like a parasitic, like tick-borne disease or something. So it can sometimes be quite difficult to get to that diagnosis eventually. So there we go. So obviously in this kind of case, prevention is better than cure.
Sorry, I got another question.
That's okay.
He said something about deer ticks. Is that different to like normal ticks?
It's just a like species, or like you can get varying different.
The black foot, they've got the black feet, and they're normally, well, they look like that. Whereas you got the white ones, or you got the deer ticks. What do you call it? What do you call it?
Yeah, basically just avoid them all. So you want prevention is better than cure in this case. So obviously there is a little bit of a time frame to be able to get a tick off before it's actually released the babesia into the host. So that's where you'll get like, you know, the use of tick twisters and trying to keep an eye on animals' coat and everything, just to try and, even at that really small, like nymphal stage, try and get them off as soon as you possibly can. Has anyone used like Advantix at all? Yeah? What can you tell me about Advantix?
It does its job.
It's all right.
Yeah.
So it's got a certain amount of like tick repellent in it, as well as it will kill them once they've actually bitten as well. So some people use this during tick season, just because it kind of has a certain level of repellent to stop the tick ever actually latching on. That makes sense? So again, you're kind of preventing the risk of them even biting in the first place. So yeah, don't just grab tweezers like that other lady said.
That's surprising me, but I also found you as well.
Yes. So we'll have a look at some mites now. So again, more itchiness, sorry. So these are small arthropods, which generally give symptoms of dermatitis, pruritus, and inflammation. So again, that's sort of like inflamed skin that's going to be itchy. You're going to get a lot of scratching from animals that have got mites. And as with all of the others, they can also act as a vector for other diseases. So dust mites can transmit rickettsial pox. Does anyone know what that is? No?
Rickets.
It's basically a form of pox rather than rickets. So they can act as a vector for that. Again, you're going to normally have diagnosis through identification under the microscope from either skin scrapes or coat brushing or hair plucks, depending on what sample you've taken. So you should be able to see them wandering around under the microscope. So we normally sort of categorize them as burrowing mites or chewing mites. So for burrowing mites, we've got sarcoptic scabi, so scabies. They're going to be a burrowing mite, which in turn can end up causing sarcoptic mange, and also demodex, which will then lead to demodectic mange. These are both classed as a burrowing mite. So you really only end up with the mange phase of things when there's an increased population that the host can't deal with. So certainly a lot of dogs will have a certain amount of demodex and scabies on them naturally, and they can handle it, and that's okay. But it's when it becomes a rife infestation that you'll end up with mange. So, as we've seen before already, you've got your scabies and your demodex over here, and then this is what we mean when we say mange, this kind of skin condition that they can form. Again, really sore, really itchy. You'll get a lot of hair loss and thickening of the skin, as well as sort of scabbing, and it will cause that like increase in self-trauma and scratching along the way. So, I'm a little puppy with mange, unfortunately. So it's seen in dogs, cats, and some wild animals, koalas, bears, great apes, and ungulates, so large hoofed mammals. So they resemble an allergic reaction. So again, depending on what your diagnosis, procedure is, this might be a differential diagnosis as well as sort of flea allergic dermatitis. So depending on how far down the process you are and the severity of the mange, it could be mistaken as flea allergic dermatitis. They will have fairly similar presentation. So the mites basically embed themselves in the skin or the hair follicles, depending on what they normally do. So they will have sort of different routes depending on the type of mite. So like you said, Sarcoptes burrows into the skin, and Demodex will live in the hair follicles. So that will also depend on what diagnostic test you run as well. So hair plucks will be quite useful for Demodex because you should be able to see them within the end of the hair pluck and the follicle. And then for the burrowing skin of the scabies, you want to get that skin scrape that we kind of discussed before, just to get the layers of skin. So demodicosis, so red mange, it's basically, like I said, it's a sensitivity or overpopulation of the Demodex mite. So most dogs will have a natural occurring Demodex mite within the hair follicles around their muzzle, but it only becomes an issue when it becomes sort of overrun, and then you're with, your poor friend in the corner here. So normally it results in symptoms if they're immunocompromised. So if there's something else, an underlying systemic disease, they can then become overrun with Demodex. So much with a lot of the skin conditions that we've looked at, they're going to have irritation, hair loss, inflammation, and then you can get secondary infection through the sort of self-trauma that they've caused. If they're leaving themselves with open sores and things, you can get secondary infection of those wounds, which, as it says there, in rare cases can be life-threatening if it then becomes sepsis or like systemic infection. There's a certain number of breeds that are predisposed to Demodex as well. Does anyone know any breeds that are predisposed to it? Yeah? Yeah. So German Shepherds, Great Danes, Dalmatians and collies tend to have a predisposition to becoming overrun by Demodex. So, moving on to lice. So, does anyone know anything about any? Oh, hi.
Sorry, I don't know if it was on the PowerPoint, I can't remember. The sarcoptic mange is the type of mange that is zoonotic.
Yeah, the scabies. Yeah. So, does anyone know anything about the different types of lice that are out there? The common ones that we see.
Head lice.
Head lice, yeah. No. So Phyllocola is the cat louse. That's this one here, the first one. Trichodectes canis, as the name suggests, is canine, but specifically that's the chewing louse. And then Linonampus is the dog sucking louse. So they're the two different types. You can see they've got that very different head type. So you can see how that's going to be a chewer, and then they've got this horrible sucking part of their head. So generally speaking, they feed on skin and other debris that's found on the body. as well as blood, particularly if they are the sucking variety. So you will generally find that there's species-specific louse for each kind of companion animal that we're going to be seeing. And again, they're divided into two categories. So you get the sucking lice that feed on secretions and like bodily fluids of the host, and then the chewing lice that feed on skin, feathers, hair debris. So that's kind of how they differentiate. As you can imagine, this is going to cause, it says mild irritation, but it makes me want to rip my own skin off now just talking about it. So symptoms include mild irritation, hair loss, widespread inflammation in general, and then if the infestations are heavy enough, it can actually, it's been proven to kind of decrease the life expectancy of the host. So it can have quite a profound effect on longevity as well. I can't remember whether I put a break in here or whether I need to just initiate a break. I might initiate a break after this slide. So, as with everything else thus far, they can also be a vector for disease. So they transmit a lot of microbial and worm-type parasites. So there's some research which will show that lice also reduce the ability to thermoregulate their host to be able to thermoregulate. Has anyone seen anything like this? Yeah?
I was just going to say, lice in birds is like the worst thing ever.
Yeah.
Because it gets everywhere, it gets on your clothes. And...
Yeah. So Icynosteren, lice in birds, that is one of the lice that's shown to kind of reduce their ability to thermoregulate. So that's going to be a symptom that's going to have to be sort of managed, as well as obviously dealing with the infestation as well.
Just take the scrubs off and burn them.
Yeah, burn all of your clothes afterwards. So we'll have a little break here and then we'll move on to endoparasites when we come back. Should we say 5 minutes?
It was only because you know that same sort of age, but I was like, I used to visit the church, she used to look after the bathroom, and these kids, their hair used to just be rolling every weekend. We used to have them. She had to do lysine again. Bad hair. But they didn't shower. Oh yeah, everyone has a lot. You know what I mean? It's just these different things. Like literally like the whole 2 years we used to transfer and oh, no, like 5 and 6 year olds. Oh, how? It's not hard to just kind of, oh. I just used to chuck a dye on my daughter's hair if she had a cotton. The same natural colour, you know, I'd match it for a colour and then just chuck a dye on. It killed everything. Dead. And
I think what I was saying.
there was a kid in that house. It was constantly covered in.
Oh, there's always one.
My dad just said
Not like, yeah, anyway. I just used to be white. Just crazy sort of there.
Oh, my mum and my dad, they left me at home with the cat. All of them. I love her. I love my cat. She's so annoying at the moment. I watched them do it. 60. Oh, look at these pictures. They haven't been not the new helmet. This is one of. I've got 4 helmets now because I've got this slightly. This is the new helmet. I love it. Absolutely love it. And I ordered the visor yesterday. It's like a blue to go with it. I know. That's why I smiled because I knew I was affected. One of my friends messaged me and was like, "What was it? That's hilarious." What did he say? He says, "Can't believe you went naked in the visor reflection." And I was like, "I didn't. ... Just trying to make me happy. I did double check to be on the safe side, but I knew I wasn't. Oh, it's okay. It's raining in the beach, so they had to go and dive.
I left one down first, so at least I can hold the bottle.
Yeah. I did notice really mix with dingo. So you get really
What's that?
you breathe. It's got dingo in it.
Oh, really?
I'm trying to find an actual reason as to why ticks don't. It does say that they got an extra thick coating on there. It's like keeps them warm, but also keeps them cool. The weather coat. It's very thick, so maybe ticks are too thick. Because they did say that they're restricted by clothing. They normally like. So maybe they just say it with a burn and then go, screw this. I'll find someone easier.
Quite a depth of this mask in there, and she tries to cram a lot into
You're okay, so you're very, very quiet today.
I've sent him it.
Yeah.
Anyway.
They're just very good at looking after themselves, as well as kelpies as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she's like, oh, yeah.
And that's nice of them. The one you made, that one. Oh God. Just don't kill him, okay?
Oh,
Whatever she can't say out loud.
that's
So I'm just messaging you.
Just message the group chat.
Oh my god.
Cool, I need to bring a chain. Oh, so cute.
Gets quite a few actually.
That's
I literally don't have a clue what that was.
Well, there's another one. Yeah.
The way the stock's been running over the last 3 weeks,
Oh my God. Did you get them in the UK?
Last time I checked, no.
Really?
I don't think. It might be like one person with them, but I doubt that really is.
They're so cute. They look like a box in like German shop.
well, well done. Then we talk through the lesson later on, so.
Yeah, right back to the first, isn't it? The only 12 we've got is that one, heads up.
You know, the
You're not doing anything, I think. I am.
Yeah, I'll put the activity form in and I'll pay the deposit.
I'm sure you'll be on it, it's just, oh, you've got the email. But yeah, double check with James.
Speak to James, if not bad enough.
Should we start again?
Yeah. Where can organs add vectors to diseases? Can they add vector at each stage of that life?
Is that another really?
So it will depend a little bit, so.
Oh, it's your dog? Oh, it's you. What's his name?
Ziggy.
Ziggy.
Well, apparently, it depends, especially if you have that in there, we'll say at that point, so it'll be.
That's such a good photo.
Yeah, we literally just decided Friday we were kind of going through like diseases, it's like. But you know, it's got the life, like, we settled on Lyme disease. So it's like,
Yeah. Have like a cap or something.
Right, so let's move on to endoparasites. So, as we've already established, these are going to be parasites that live inside the host rather than on the skin and in the hair, like the other guys that we've mentioned already. So they can be found intercellular, which is going to be inhabiting the spaces within the host body, or intracellular, so in the actual cells within the host. That's kind of how we would categorize them. So it will include parasitic worms and flukes. We'll go into this, basically, a type of worm. They're all gross, so. So how I'm gonna like actually keep my porridge down.
I prefer like the other sort of things to something to just happy.
So, ints is basically the term that we use to refer to like intestinal worms in general. So they're worm-like organisms living in and feeding on living hosts. So these will include flatworms, cestodes, trematodes, which is flukes, and nematodes. So if we start off with flatworms, such as tapeworms, these are found in the digestive tract. So over 1,000 different species are recognised, but some of the ones that are commonly seen, here we go with the words. Does anyone know them? Yeah. I mean, you'll get ready to hear me say some, and we know that I'm not good at that. So we'll go with it. Anyone want to try this?
Diploidium?
Yeah, Diploidium. So they can be an intermediate host of fleas, or they have an intermediate host of fleas. So again, like we said, fleas, when they bite, will often be able to pass on worms within their biting. So this is one of the ones that they can pass. And Echinococcus as well. Came off the tongue pretty well, didn't it? Pleased with that one. So They will be found in small rodents, deer and sheep. They're an intermediate host for those. So we'll have a look at a few of them. A lot of the time, these things will be passed on by ingestion of the eggs or larvae in feces or affected meat. Hiya.
That one's different to
So flatworms are a subcategory of cestodes.
Right, okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then a tapeworm is a type of flatworm.
Okay.
So it's like moving down the chain here.
Okay.
So we'll have a look at the basic anatomy of cestodes in general. So this is sort of what we're looking at here, this great long thing, and then this bit that looks a bit like a diver's helmet is the scolex. So it basically, that's the end that will attach to the intestines in the definitive host, so the primary host that you're that is going to latch onto the intestines via this part. So it's got these sort of sucking grooves called bothria that help with the attachment. So this is this area here. We'll have a look at one of the videos in a bit and it'll show you it in action, which is grim. And then we've got proglottids, which are basically all of these like little individual sections. So it's successive body segments. So each one will actually contain male and female reproductive organs, so they can reproduce independently. So the ones furthest away from the scolex, so down here, will be the mature ones that contain eggs, and they're the ones that will be shed in feces. So generally what you're seeing, if you see worms in feces, isn't actually the worm, it's one section of proglottid that's broken off and has been shed, but the actual worm is still in and attached at the intestines by the scolex. Does that make sense? Yeah. So in these cases, basically, they shouldn't really be considered as a single organism. It should rather be like a colony of the proglottids, because they can sort of independently reproduce because they've got male and female reproductive organs in each little bit. Like a weird clone colony that just lives in another organism.
Apparently the longest one was 82 feet.
82 feet.
Wow.
This is the thing, you hear about people that like get a tapeworm as like a weight loss treatment and stuff, and I'm like, I can't imagine anything worse.
No.
Oh. So this is going to be a look at tapeworm eggs under a microscope. So this is what they're going to look like. And then this is what I mean when you have the proglottids. So they sometimes are called egg packets. So this is the little bit that will shed off. And sometimes they can be like moving in the feces and stuff. So you can understand why people say like, oh, there was worms in the poo, because they do look like individual little worms, but actually it's just part of one big grossness. So let's have a look. Yeah, probably something.
Fleas transmit the tapeworm Dipylidium caninum, the most common tapeworm of dogs and cats. The larva of this tapeworm is carried in the body of the flea. Dogs and cats
So you can see why when we kind of talk about like flea and worm treatment, it does very much go like hand in hand. Oh yeah.
So the flea, which is a parasite, has a parasite in it.
Yeah. Like I said, it very much goes hand in hand. So in kind of dealing with flea preventative treatment, you are also kind of secondarily dealing with like prevention of tapeworm as well.
Is it true though that like somebody told me that everybody has a small amount of worms in them at one time?
I mean, I don't know that that's true.
Okay.
Like the general public. I know that like in my profession, there are nurses that worm themselves fairly regularly because the understanding is that you probably do have some amount of worms within you just because of the nature of the job.
Okay.
But I don't think like the general public would have, unless I mean what they do in their own time.
Okay, it's just something I heard and I was like, oh, okay, that means we've all got it.
Yeah. Yeah, but I don't think it'd be like a general, most people have them.
With animals, you can clean much.
Yeah, because
Something in
at the end of that
animals to eat
cycle, obviously you've just got the eggs are excreted in feces. So, you know, if there's not proper hand hygiene and things like that, or you've got a dog that just likes to eat crap, literally, then that's going to be how they can get it rather than from fleas themselves. Like there's plenty of ways that it will like infiltrate a host. So the one that we looked at, the Diphylidium caninum, is known as the dog tapeworm. So dogs are sort of like the definitive host for it, but it can occasionally infect cats and humans, and it's more likely to occur in young children. Worth bearing in mind, like you said, in terms of hand hygiene and things like that, playing in parks, making sure that kids aren't rolling around in grass and then immediately putting their hands in their mouth, because you're at risk of this. So moving on to nematodes, these are roundworms. So there are around 28,000 species, and over sort of 16,000 of these are parasitic. So they're not all parasitic, they don't all have to live within a host as part of their life cycle, but a good volume of them are. So they can be transmitted via a parentenic host, so rats or mice. Does anyone know what a parentenic host is?
This isn't like where they take over the hosts, or they, I don't know if it's like hormones or something, and they get the animal basically to be eaten by another animal, like let's say a cat or something, so they purposely get the...
Yeah, so it's normally when it's part of quite a complex life cycle with more than one sort of species of host, it will be, like we've said, almost like that little off the side host that gets brought in.
The mouse is attracted to feline urine or something. So that
going into like the
them,
psyche of it now.
It causes them to move towards, a bit like sometimes you get like the snails that get the worms and it causes.
Yeah, so we'll go on to like lungworm and stuff. They're prone to
Toxic plasmosis.
Oh.
Yeah,
That's the cat one.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the cat gets the actual worm from that inhabits the mice or the rats. Oh, so
it's basically a species that acts as a secondary or subsequent intermediate host for a parasite as part of quite a complex life cycle that normally includes 2 or more different species within that cycle. So quite right, like you said, rats or mice, if they're then eaten by a carnivore and then the cycle continues. So that's how they can be transmitted. So they're part of the ascarid family. So Toxocara canis or Felis, and then you'll get Toxoscaris leonina is also affecting dogs and cats as well. So we'll have a look at some of these. So this is just an overview of what we're looking at when we roundworm roundworms and nematodes. So they have got that stereotypical round appearance. This is what an egg would look like, and then this is sort of like their scolex type.
Well, how can they hold them? Oh,
And no gloves, what the
gloves
hell?
on.
Yeah, they give them bareback, horrible. So if we have a look at Toxocara canis, like we said, a lot of these will have quite a complicated life cycle, so they'll have many sort of methods of transmission and different ways that they can be picked up and brought within that cycle, and then the cycle can start. So it can be through the ingestion of eggs. So like we said before, if there's like eggs that have been shed in feces and then are left on the ground, if you've got, I don't know, dogs in particular, love to scavenge and eat other things, feces for whatever reason. So that would be a way in which, yeah, that would be a way in which they can get ingested. Ingestion of a transport host, like we said. So if you have a carnivore that hunts and scavenges corpses on a walk, not a human corpse, but like dead things on a walk, then that would be another way. It can also be transplacenta transmission and also through milk. So that's why it's quite important to make sure that pregnant cats and also like whelping and lactating bitches are wormed regularly for this, because they can sort of pass it on through milk and through the placenta when they're pregnant. So I think a lot of the symptoms that these guys produce is kind of what everyone thinks of when they think of like the stereotypical worm burden. So that kind of like pot belly, diarrhea, poor growth, weight loss, poor coat condition. However, you will get the odd case where they don't have any outward signs and they are managing to kind of maintain a normal appearance and a normal level of life, even though they've got these passengers on board. And then from a zoonotic aspect, it can result in blindness. So again, that will be particularly within children as well. So a heavy worm burden within a child can then lead to blindness later down. There's like a chronic symptom of it. So as you can see, it's quite a complicated life cycle this time. So the adult Toxocara is in the intestine of a puppy, or 10% of adult dogs sometimes. So the eggs get passed into the feces, and then the eggs containing second stage larvae are on the ground. So then they can be eaten by humans, eaten by an adult dog. The puppy can be reinfected or infected by eating the infected eggs. They might be taken up by the parentenic host, such as the rat or the mouse. So then you've got various different routes that you can go down. So that rat or mouse can then be eaten by the host, and we're sort of back to where we were again. The ingested larvae can migrate from the intestines through the body, and they can rest in some sites in muscles. The puppy infected with third stage larvae, it's from milk. So you've got all of these varying routes that it can have its infestation. So like we said, some of them, especially with the worms, are going to have quite complex cycles that, in terms of diagnosis and prevention, it's going to be quite difficult to work out where you've got this from, or if they keep reinfecting themselves. You've got a dog that scavenges. Well, if it's not the scavenging that's causing it, where else could it be from? And so it can be quite difficult to keep a handle on. So we'll have a little look.
Dogs and cats can get
Sorry about the
infected with
dodgy
round
animation.
worms and larvae
So yeah, not ideal. So there's various different types of other nematodes that we might see. Has anyone encountered any of these? Hookworm, heartworm, whipworm, or lungworm? Sorry, where did the voice come from? Oh,
As I've heard of lungworm,
yeah.
but I don't know much.
Okay, that's fine. We're going to go into lungworm anyway.
Heartworm.
Yeah. So I think heartworm and lungworm in particular are becoming a bit more of a risk within companion animals.
Again, I've just heard of it. I've not luckily encountered it.
Yeah.
But
Whitlam I've not heard of.
Yeah, so they're all
I've heard of it because it's all
lungworm.
covered in the stronghold that I use.
Sorry?
I said, I've heard of all of them because it's actually
Yeah.
in the stronghold that I get from the vet.
Yeah. So we'll have a little bit of a deeper look at heartworm. So it's Dirofilaria immitis. Did it? Nice. So they're basically spread through a mosquito vector. So its definitive host is normally going to be a dog, but they can also infect cats and foxes. The name kind of suggests that it's going to just be residing within the heart, but actually more often than not, it's found in the lungs, and that's kind of where it does the majority of its damage. So in later stages, if it's not sort of picked up on quick enough, it can also occasionally migrate to the right side of the heart, and I think that's kind of where it gets its name from. So severe infections that aren't sort of picked up quickly, and like we said, they can kind of migrate to the right side of the heart, will then lead to heart failure a bit later down the line. Then lungworm is the other kind of common one that will,
isn't it?
yeah. So this is Angiostrongylus basarum, which infects the lungs of vertebrates. So it's kind of a common name for several different species of nematodes, but it's something that's becoming more prevalent, especially within veterinary practice and things, to try and prevent or have preventative treatments in place for lungworm. So the most common symptoms, obviously as the name kind of suggests, is going to be wheezing or problems with respiration, breathing difficulties, and then weight loss. So the larvae in the lungs, depending on, the larvae in the lungs will cause a mucus blockage because your immune system will try and fight them away. And then this can cause sort of, real congestion within the lungs, blockages in the airways and in the lungs. So that's kind of where you get this wheezing and difficulty breathing. So normally we just detect them via stethoscope. So it says like that's just an easy thing to do, but obviously when you're listening to a chest, there's a few things that could cause wheezing in patients. So again, it's not always going to be your first thought or your first differential diagnosis that this is lungworm. You kind of have to look at the bigger picture with them. You can also see them on X-ray, and you'll be able to see fecal flotation. You'll be able to see the eggs in feces as well. How do I not turn you off?
Oh, so sorry.
That's all right. I'm going to put a video on now anyway, so.
Oh.
Oh.
Just put on
So yeah, as you can see, that's your kind of generic slugs and snails type worm that everyone gets warned about at the vets. Not only sort of like ingestion of like slugs and snails, but also if they are prone to, if you've got like water bowls outside that a slug or snail has like been in and has left like a snail trail within them, it can be shed within the like snail slime as well. So it's worth just keeping on top of things like that as well, and bearing that in mind, because I think sometimes in cases that I've seen, owners have said like, oh no, like they'd never eat a snail, like I'd never see them eat a snail or a slug or whatever. And then actually when you talk to them about some of their habits and things like that, it turns out that they have got like a water trough that they always drink from on a walk and things like that, and actually that's probably where it's happened instead. So we'll have a look now at Toxoplasma gondii, which is basically toxoplasmosis. So it's a parasitic protozoa, which the definitive host is the cat. So I think this is the one that you guys were talking about. But it can be carried by many species, including humans. So again, this will be one of your zoonotic parasites. So approximately 1/3 of people around the world carry the disease, mostly from eating undercooked meat. It's only really a severe problem if it's first contracted during pregnancy, or if you're particularly immunocompromised. So in terms of in catteries, veterinary practices, places where you're going to be exposed to cats, this will be one of the first sort of risk assessments that's done as soon as someone within the like business announces that they're pregnant, because then you very much have to have all like, you know, all support given so that that person ideally doesn't have to deal with cat feces if they can avoid it, because it can cause like premature labour and abortion as well, so, or miscarriage. So again, it's got a fairly intensive cycle. So you'll get cysts which encase the protozoa, and then these will be released in the stomach and the intestines, and they can go off to invade varying tissues. They'll then go cycle round so that they reproduce and mature, and then are released within the feces, and the cycle starts again. But like we said, it can also affect other species like rodents and birds as well, but generally it's cats that are the ones that you need to be wary of. So we'll move on to trematodes now. So this is what we know as flukes. Does anyone have any sort of like prior knowledge of flukes at all, or any experience with them at all?
I got taught them on level 3, but all I remember is that it looked like that.
It's quite memorable looking.
So this is the life cycle of the Fasciola hepatica, which is basically the common like liver fluke. So there's I'm pretty sure this is meant to be a cow in the picture, but it tends to kind of, it's got some, basically sheep are prone to acute cases of it. So you might also have it known as like sheep fluke or sheep liver fluke as well. So again, we'll have the infected host will shed eggs 8 to 12 weeks after infection onto the ground. They'll then be picked up by a particular species of snail, so the mud snail, and then they will emerge and be picked up by the mud snail. They then basically develop to like a mobile stage, which is the cercaria after 5 to 7 weeks, and then these are able to kind of transport themselves throughout those damp conditions and that damp pasture to then be picked up again on the grass. So yeah, it's normally within sort of damp, muddy conditions, pasture on farms and things like that, that they're going to be prevalent. The eggs don't develop significantly if it's sort of below 10 degrees. So therefore, the cycle normally kind of happens between May and October. Again, it's a summer thing, kind of in that warmer phase of the year, because once it sort of hits below 10 degrees, they can't develop as quickly, and the cycle kind of slows down or stops entirely during those times. So again, with all of these, there's going to be a number of different treatments that we can have against all your various types of worms. So normally these will be monthly treatments, depending on what they're actually covering and the life cycle of each worm involved. Has anyone kind of been given advice as well to kind of up the frequency that they're giving wormer depending on like habits of their pet as well? So certainly, like sometimes if they are particular scavengers, so if you've got a dog or a cat that's always hunting and always bringing things in, we will normally try and say, you know, to do worming monthly or 3 monthly, rather than you can get away with 6 months in pets that aren't going to be doing it as often. Yeah.
So could this be transmittable with like raw liver, relating it to sort of like zoos?
Yeah.
Sheep.
Yeah. Again, so like uncooked meat and things like that, it can be transmissible through that. So it will depend on where you're getting your food sources as well, and also with the increase in like raw diets with dogs and cats as well. So again, that's something else that we might suggest you increase the frequency if they are on a raw diet. Obviously, everyone thinks they've got the best raw diet in the world, but actually, if it's not sourced correctly, you could be in the situation where you are effectively giving infected raw meat. So then we would up the frequency of treatment.
I'm just signed up to one of the services that just delivers to me every month, so I don't forget the day.
Yeah, I'm on the vet plans. Post it out to me.
Yeah.
So as we said, there's a few of these that we've already talked about that are going to be protozoa. So this is just a sort of summary slide to let you know the parasites that fall under the protozoa title. So toxoplasmosis, as we've just said, that's going to be a protozoa. Leishmania, does anyone know anything about leishmania?
Sounds like a 70s band.
We're going to move on to it anyway, so don't worry. So that would be another protozoan parasite. Babesia and Giardia as well. They're all a form of protozoa, so that kind of gives you a bit of an overview.
Oh, that's what they got told me that. And I'm trying to Guardian.
Yeah. So we then try and break them down a little bit further from just the kind of title of protozoa. So a lot of the time they'll be grouped based on their like locomotion. So there'll be flagellates. Does anyone know?
Yeah.
Could tell me?
They have a tail.
Yeah, so they effectively have a tail. I don't know. There we go. This is my picture of a flagellate. So they've basically got a tail that they use for swimming, mobility, within the way that they get around and locomotion. Amoeboid, Does anyone know how amoeboids get around? Yeah, kind of. So they're these guys. They do like the extension and retraction of the like pseudopod extension. So when you like the generic amoeba that you see under a microscope a lot, where they've got like the little wiggly arms coming out and going
Tentacles.
in. Kind of, yeah. So that's kind of their mobility. Ciliates.
It's almost like tiny little hairs.
Yeah, so that's this one here. They've got almost like a large collection of flagella. So rather than just having one singular long one like the one at the top, they've got almost like this hair or like fringe of them that they'll be able to move around. They call them cilia. So they will be able to move those around. That's another form of locomotion with them. And then sporozoan. Does anyone know how they get around?
Just like the same as like fungal spores, like it kind of builds up and it bursts.
Yeah, so these are these ones down here. You can see they haven't got a lot of like obvious locomotion like equipment on them, so they do just kind of almost spore. They'll have like minute contractions and be able to maneuver that way. So a lot of the time, protozoa will sort of congregate in protective cysts within the body and within the host. So like we saw when they have a cyst within the muscle layer, they'll be able to have a protective cyst that they can almost lie dormant in until the correct time to be able to come out and sort of infiltrate the body. But it will also mean that those cysts can be shed and just be housed within the environment as well. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a cyst within a host, it can be a cyst in the environment too. So the periods that they're able to survive in those like range literally from like days to years. So sometimes it's where there's kind of a bit of a grey area between whether they can technically be classed as a parasite or not, because they are able to survive for quite extended periods of time outside of a host and have some development during that time within a cyst. Does that make sense? So we'll have a little look at leishmaniasis now and kind of the zoonotic risk involved in it. So, sorry, I forgot. Did anyone say they did know about like leishmaniasis at all, or? So it's transmitted by sandflies and can be zoonotic. So it's kind of distributed into two stages. So you have the sandfly stage or the mammalian host stage. So within that, the infected sandfly will take a meal and transmit the promastigotes to the host skin, and then these will be taken up by macrophages, and in that time they'll multiply within the macrophages in the bloodstream. They'll grow and multiply until they're in macrophages in multiple different tissues around the host, and then they basically cause a breakage of that infected cell, so they will burst the macrophage, and then they're able to infect other cells around the body during that time. So that's kind of how they are able to get around in a mammal or in a zoonotic sense.
Is this fly strike?
No.
So it's not quite that.
No, not really.
Yeah.
I mean, fly strike is a bit more like superficial than this. It's more kind of a skin condition.
Yeah.
So this is, it might be something that you get like secondary to this if you are sort of having a
Something that's already affected.
Yeah. So it normally just causes these quite large lesions on the skin, especially in humans. That will be something that is often seen. So it's found in people in more than 90 countries, but it's normally sort of this tropics or subtropics, southern Europe, sort of like right around the equator, all of these sort of like warm areas where, to start with, sandflies are more prevalent, but also the protozoa of leishmaniasis is quite prevalent as well because of the heat. So it sort of ranges from rainforest to desert, so it doesn't necessarily have to be dry, it just has to be warm. So there's a certain amount of climate and like other environmental changes that have meant that the sort of geographical range that we're seeing leishmaniasis in has changed somewhat. So a lot of the time this is it's rarely cured, but it can be sort of managed, but the prognosis can be quite guarded. There is some vaccination available in certain countries. And has anyone heard of a Scalaba collar? So it's a little bit like the Seresto collars, but particularly if you're taking a pet to one of these countries that's prevalent for leishmaniasis, a Scalaba collar will kind of help to repel the sandflies and kind of prevent infection that way. You're looking at me. Like,
Oh no, I was just working out. It's not. Oh, I was hearing Excalibur, and I was like, it's Excalibur.
No, Scalaba. So
Okay.
just. Do you want me to write it? But basically, really, what you need to be doing is just minimising exposure to sandflies. So much like we have with malaria and stuff like that, you're going to be trying to use insect repellent, use like nets at night to stop insects being able to bite. So it's more kind of trying to reduce the exposure than preventing the disease as such. So this is just a little study that basically had a look at the distributions of leishmaniasis. So one of the sort of reservoir species are various different types of rodents within that sort of on that belt of the equator. So this sort of shows the distribution of those reservoir species in North America. So you can see this is showing 4 different species and just showing like basically where they like to hang out. And then they kind of made the prediction that as climate change changes our environment and the sort of average top temperature that is happening around the world, we're kind of getting that migration of these reservoir species away from the equator, and they're kind of starting to move more north. So that's kind of why there's been a bit of a shift with the exposure in humans and people that wouldn't normally be exposed, sort of finding that actually there's been cases because the reservoir species are moving because of changes in the climate. You actually made that. Well done, guys. For like listening to all of that for that long. So I'll make sure that all of the videos that we've got on there, I don't think that if you want to watch them, like the dodgy animation. I'll make sure that
the dog movie was on like 3 videos.
Yeah, it was like a series, I think. They were like, yeah, we need to use this guy. We've paid someone to produce this pooping dog, so we need to use him. So I will make sure that there's a load of journals and stuff up there that's like surrounding all the various parasites that we've looked at today, as well as I'll make sure that all the videos are up there as well, so you can have a look at those when it comes to revision, just to try and get the cycles a bit more, because you know that's going to be easier to learn from than me just pointing at a cycle on a slide. That's all right.
It's a bit of a weird question, Catherine.
Yeah.
Science or resources or anything like that, would it be beneficial for you? I technically had it on my phone, but I'm moving those off my computer. Yeah, phone of it. One of our vaccines has a stand-up game, but excuse when I was checking on her, she had a load of things that had been put on my class. Yeah, on a rabbit time with a load of them. Yes.
I've got a file on like my phone.
Yeah.
Basically anything that might be useful.
Yeah.
That I like retrieving.
When we were talking about like this sort of
Yeah.
it was literally that weekend when I was like checking on her and I was like, oh maybe. But Bless her. I must have been doing it. They're going to stand that all upright from the spine and things like that. So, yeah. They're going up to.
Oh, yeah.
With you regarding the presentation.
Yeah.
I think if I emailed you and said that I think at the beginning we're sort of focusing on roundworms
Yeah.
in general, and then I'm doing the diagnosis and treatment. So
Yeah.
I think for that we're specifically going into the, well, I've done that bit, I've specifically gone into the Toxicara,
Okay.
Catty,
Yeah.
or Felis. A lot of journals will say Catty actually rather than Felis. So,
Yeah, you'll get varying all
I'm
over the
guessing
place.
that's okay to start broad. And then,
Yeah, yeah.
And then